Oh, if I'm sitting like this facing that,
Okay. I'll come in a
my
little bit.
knees will be the biggest thing in the picture.
You look good. Okay. All right. So tell me about. Okay, so you said, I know you told me about when you met Daddy Joe. And do you remember how he proposed to you?
Oh, I do. We were walking on the beach at night.
And did he have a ring?
No. I didn't get a ring until 6 months before we got married.
Did he get
If
down
I
on
had
one
shown
knee?
up with a ring at 17, my family would have had an explosion.
Why? Well, because
Why?
that's customary now. Like when Trey proposed to me,
Yes.
they get down on one knee and present the ring, right?
Well, Joe waited and asked Daddy if he could marry me. And
Oh, okay.
Mother wasn't at all concerned. She knew he was going to say no. And she thought I was way too young. And when he asked Dad, he said, sure. So that was a real blow to her. She was
Right.
just overwhelmed, and she wasn't anxious for me to have a ring to show everybody because she
Right.
thought I was way too young
young.
and maybe I'd change my mind.
Okay.
But she loved Joe. She had once said when she saw him at church and he was helping his mother out of the car, she said, that's the way I'd want my son to treat me if I had a son.
That's sweet.
So it wasn't the problem that she didn't think Joe was wonderful. She thought I was way too young.
Right.
And not only that, I'll give you the advice, maybe you'll give it to your children. She told me when I married Joe, she said, darling, you're always welcome at home as long as you're on good terms with Joe.
Oh,
And I have told my kids that.
that's good advice.
That's good advice.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Well, tell me about your wedding day. Where did you get married? What was the setting and things like
We
that?
got married in St. Patrick's Cathedral, which was a small wooden church that had been built 100 years before. It had
And this was in Corpus, right?
in Corpus.
Okay.
And I can't remember the street. It was one block off of Leopard Street. And the school was on one corner and it was on the other. But it had wooden floors that were not finished and plain pews, but on a beautiful altar. And on either side of the altar, it had figures of angels, one on each side, and they were holding a flare that was made up of a dozen or two lights. And they were really lovely, and they are still lovely. I have seen them many times since then, in the last few years.
Oh, wow.
The church was moved to the beach and named Our Lady of the Sea. And they still have the beautiful angel figures holding the flares.
Wow.
But I thought the aisle was 2 miles long, and in reality it was a very short aisle because it was a small church. I had 2 bridesmaids, Polly Roden, who worked in the Nixon building when I did, and Joe's sister, Mary Ruth, who was 3 years older than me. And they wore velvet, pale pink, one was a little deeper than the other, and carried fans that were beautifully handmade. And they started with flowers that were pale pink, and where they held them, and there were ribbons flowing down from them, they went to hot pink. And they wore hats, little tiny brimmed hats that were covered in artificial flowers from pale pink to hot pink.
Now, I thought that you weren't a big fan of pink.
Where?
I thought you weren't a big fan of the color pink. I thought your favorite color was red.
You don't wear red for a wedding.
Well,
I love red.
right.
Yeah,
But no red for a wedding.
no red
I
for
can
a wedding.
understand that. So how many people were there, do you think?
Oh, I think about between 75 and 100.
That's a pretty big
And
wedding.
we had a dinner, not a dinner, but a breakfast over at the Plaza Deck, which was the top floor of the Plaza Hotel. It has since been torn down. But It was a seated breakfast, and I remember we had broiled grapefruit with a cherry in the middle for the first course.
Okay, so you got married on a Tuesday morning.
Tuesday morning, and people came. Can you imagine?
So Tuesday morning, because it was the anniversary of your first date,
Mm-hmm.
and so you had the wedding and then you had breakfast.
Yes.
That's so very interesting. I've never heard of a Tuesday morning.
Nobody has ever been married on Tuesday, but
I don't
no
think
doubt.
ever. Okay. All right. Well, tell me a little about becoming a mother. Like when did you find out, or how did you find out you were expecting your first baby?
Well, the usual way. And I went to the doctor and got checked out, and sure enough, I was pregnant. And Chicky was born.
Were
in
you
December.
surprised? Was it like, oh my goodness, I
No,
can't
I wasn't
believe
surprised.
it? You weren't surprised. So it was a welcomed blessing.
I was so excited that I decided to make clothes, and I wanted beautiful little, they called them socks in those days. It was a little deal that went over the baby's dress so they'd be warmer. It wasn't a sweater, made of fabric. And I bought a pattern because I sewed. All my life I've sewn. And it looked so big I cut it down to when Chicky was born I could hardly get it on her. I thought, her baby was little. Well, she weighed 7'12". And she had this pale, pale, pale blonde hair and huge blue eyes. And I just thought that I was the goose that laid the golden egg. And Joe was so excited about the baby, and he had wanted a girl. So that was good. And he went home from the hospital early that evening, that we were coming home the next day, and he not only bought a Christmas tree that touched the ceiling of our apartment, but a box of Stover's candy. And the next day, I came home in an ambulance, of all things, after being in the hospital a week. That was a terrible way to have a baby, to stay off your feet for a week. And he carried Chicky around to show her the tree, sucking on a piece of Stover's candy. And every year of his life, he bought Chicky a box of Stover's candy. And I have continued it. Every year I give her Stover's candy for Christmas with everything else.
I didn't know that.
So it was a nice tradition. And he had discussed once that maybe he could leave in his will and leave a sum that every year she would have candy. But since I've lived so long, she's had candy for a pretty long time because she's 70 now.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool.
Oh my goodness.
So then
we were just overwhelmed.
So then after Chicky, there was Mike.
5.5 years later, there was Mike.
And then
4.5 years later, there was George.
Mm-hmm. And then...
And George, I had him in 3.5 hours. I thought that was really good. Because others I'd spent a whole day doing it.
Oh, wow. And later.
So,
lickety split.
Yeah. And George had peeling skin, and his eyes were swollen shut. He was allergic to the stuff they put in new babies' eyes.
Oh.
And so he looked like a mess. And at 6 months, he was the most adorable, curly-headed little boy you have ever seen. Good, he was the best baby we had. He ate and slept just like they should. And Mike had been an angel about going to bed, but if he breathed deep, it woke him up. And Chicky had never intended to go to sleep in her life. She was so interested in life, she would have popped her eyelids open with toothpicks if she could have. But anyhow, we all learned to cope with each other's sleeping habits, and things worked out fine.
So then how many years after George
2.5.
did Jan come along? 2.5 years. Okay.
Yes.
So you had a pretty good amount of time.
They were 12.5 years. A 12.5 year spread. So we had big kids and little kids. That's when Mike and Chicky looked so big compared with the new baby, who 7'6" was small, we thought. And Gee, particularly after Mike weighed 9 too.
Oh my.
Well, he was nice and round and fat. We weren't afraid to jiggle him around.
So how did you come up with the name George Anthony?
That was my dad's name.
Okay.
And he had really hurt feelings that Mike wasn't named after him, but Mike was named after Joe Dowling's grandfather. And I think every man has a right to name his own child.
That's right.
So, anyhow, the second boy was named after Rick, and he was just overwhelmed. However, he adored Mike, and he called him Little Joe. And he really, if we would let him, he would have taken Mike over completely and had him live with them, with Mother and he.
So you were in Dallas when you had all of your children
Yes.
and had nobody there, no family there, and you had 4 children by yourself all day long.
Yeah.
So how did you maintain your sanity?
Well, it was a struggle. But when Jan went to school, I started garden clubbing. And one day Joe asked me, "Honey, do you think you'll ever stay at home again?" And I said, "Never." I went and did every day. There was something. I had a marvelous time. I had help 3 days a week, which made a difference.
Yeah.
But the help came in and I went out.
You went out. I know how you feel. Let's see.
And Jane was a doer and goer when she was little. She belonged to the junior garden club even.
Oh,
And
really?
And she loved parties. And she was so cute, and everybody, if they were having a coffee, they invited Jan because they knew she loved parties.
Let's see. So we talked about, here's just some random questions for you. I think I know the answer to this one. Your favorite color?
Red and blue.
Okay. And then, what would you say your favorite food is, or your favorite type of food?
Chocolate.
Chocolate, okay.
Yes, particularly these new they're melt away Hershey Kisses.
Oh.
They're the best chocolate I've had in
Ever
years.
had. How would you describe yourself?
That's a tough one.
How do you think your friends would describe you?
Well, that's a tough one too. I love to go and do, and I'm always busy. You know, I have 2 lives. I had one life that ended when Joe died. Joe Dowling died. And I thought that I would be alone forever.
Right.
And I planned to be alone forever. And Jan was still alive, and she and Sean lived with me. And I made up my mind that my aim in life then was to see that Sean went to the same school, had the same friends, had stability, which he did, and he graduated. But in the meantime, Joe Prier came into my life again, and that's my second life.
Right.
And he would describe me as somebody who kept doing. He's always saying, "You're retired, you don't have to do something every minute. You don't have to have an accomplishment or accomplish something every day." But I still have that drive that I need to do something of worth every day.
Well, and wouldn't you describe yourself as a devout Christian?
Yes, I would say so.
You go to church.
I go to church, I pray.
And how often do you go to church?
I go every Sunday and every holy day. And sometime in between,
And
if there's
sometimes in
something I
between.
really need to pray for, or some event I want to especially be there for.
So,
And yes, I belong to the St. Cecilia's Women's Club, and I attend faithfully and participate in that.
so back to Joe Prier. Now, he was telling the story earlier that you guys met in the 4th grade.
Yes. Catherine Bates and I started school down in Corpus at IWA in the 4th grade on the same day. Well, naturally, we were immediately best friends because all other kids knew each other. And we just knew each other, the two of us, so it was easy to be good friends.
Right.
And then we went to school at IWA through the 7th grade, and for the 8th grade, the boys went out to Corpus Christi College, which was a prep school. And the girls stayed at IWA for high school. So we went to school with Joe from 4th grade through the 7th grade.
And then how did they end up married?
Well, Joe called me to go to a dance, and I told him I was going steady with Joe Dowling, so I wasn't dating anybody else. And we chatted for a while, and I said, why don't you call my good friend Catherine Bates? I bet she'd go. And I really hit the jackpot because she went to the dance with him, and they dated, and then they got married and had 8 children. And I never dreamed that I would be the one to enjoy those children, and how I do enjoy them. They're wonderful people, and I love every one of them, and evidently they love me too, because I'm remembered every Mother's Day by all of them.
That's sweet.
Even the first year Joe and I were married.
So, and you guys got married on
August the 26th, 2000.
2000. Okay. I know, I was so jealous that you were getting married before me. I thought, wait a minute. Mommy Net gets to marry 2 times before I get married 1 time.
Well,
I followed quickly behind. The next
well,
year.
it was a wonderful wedding. We had all of you all on
Yeah.
either side of the aisle, remember?
I do.
So, and we wanted a church wedding, and we had a reception. And of course, everybody thought, 80 years old, ugh. Well, whoever thought we'd live to have a 10th anniversary this August
That's
coming up.
right. That's right. And tell real quick how, because it's such a good story, how Joe Prier proposed to you.
Well, he kept coming up here. In fact, when Joe died, he wrote me a letter and told me how he had coped when Catherine died, that it was better to do the same things and how to get things settled. And anyhow, he was coming up to see his daughter, and then he kept coming up to see his daughter. And finally, I realized he was coming up to see his daughter when she wasn't in town. So that was sort of a hint. And he came up and he said he had planned to ask me to marry him, and we went out to dinner, and that didn't work out at a very lovely restaurant. And then all the times he was going to ask at the house, well, there were always people at the house. You know, Honeywick was never quiet. So beside there were Jan and Sean there, and Sean's friends, and so I was going down to Corpus to visit his daughter, who lived on Mustang Island at Port Aransas. I loved to walk in the surf. And he said, well, this would just be wonderful, because she lived right on the beach. You walked out of her condo and down a little path, and there was water. It was less than a half block. So I agreed to go down there. And he came up here and picked me up. Susie wasn't in town, so he wasn't staying with Susie and George. He was staying at the house that was empty. And we went down and we got to Edna, and there was a Whataburger. So we went into the Whataburger to get a hamburger for lunch. I'd never been in a Whataburger in my life. At any rate, it suddenly dawned on me that he didn't have his wedding ring on. And I asked him where it was. I thought maybe he lost it. I was still wearing my wedding ring, an engagement ring. And he had been up until that day too. And he said, well, this morning I took it off, put it in the jewelry box, shed a tear, that was over, and said, I want to ask you to marry me. Will you marry me? And I said, I can't marry you, which was not very nice.
Oh wait, hold on, Momnet. Hold on, I'm gonna pause it so I get all this.